The Risk of Rain IP just celebrated its 10th birthday, and this past decade has been marked by some incredible innovation and development within the Risk of Rain universe. Starting with the original release of Risk of Rain in 2013, all the way up to the Survivors of the Void DLC for Risk of Rain 2, Hopoo Games, the developer of Risk of Rain 1, 2, and its DLCs, have proven that they have an incredible devotion to the world they created. For these many years, they have made some incredible content for the Risk of Rain series that shows the high level of care they have for it, and it's clear that Hopoo Games is both very talented and has a deep care for the Risk of Rain IP. Us fans have since then been long able to rest on this knowledge and expect that development of Risk of Rain content would be done with careful craftsmanship, innovation, the community in mind, and for the sole purpose of driving forward this series. That is, until everything changed. Gearbox Studios has been the longtime publisher of Risk of Rain 2, and has worked alongside Hopoo Games to publish and port their content to consoles. However, in November of 2022, Hopoo Games announced that Gearbox had bought the Risk of Rain IP, meaning that they now not only published the games, they owned them, and subsequently controlled all new content made for Risk of Rain. Needless to say, there were mixed results to this news. Some argued that maybe this was a good move. Hopoo Games could hand off the IP to another very well-established studio and pursue the new projects they wanted to tackle, while Gearbox takes the already well-constructed IP, its extensive experience in game development, and its larger resources to build onto the IP, maybe making some content that Hopoo would never have had the capability to create. But at the same time, the argument that Gearbox would not have the same passion and lack of greed as Hopoo Games stood its ground. Hopoo Games was the reason Risk of Rain is where it is today, a small indie studio with two passionate game developers that just wanted to make a fun game for themselves and eventually had a large community to enjoy it as well. Handing off such a project to, by contrast, a large team with less reason to care about one of the many games they own, some infamous notoriety in messing up other IP acquisitions, and more reason to want monetary gain obviously struck some worry in the Risk of Rain community. Both arguments remained unproven, however, as no new major content was developed solely by Gearbox after its acquisition to judge how it would handle the IP. Until just recently. And this new wave of content has got me very uncertain about the future state of Risk of Rain. So, Gearbox just announced two major pieces of content being added to the Risk of Rain universe. The first one being a brand new mobile game version of Risk of Rain Hostile Worlds, and the second being a brand new DLC for Risk of Rain 2, Seekers of the Storm. Starting with the more hot topic mobile game, this is what has got me and a lot of other people most concerned. Risk of Rain Hostile Worlds is an isometric gacha mobile version of Risk of Rain, planned to release at some undetermined date in the future. From the trailer, the core gameplay itself looks very reminiscent to Risk of Rain 2, traversing a 3D world as a survivor clearing out the monstrous life to progress through teleporters through the planet. However, there are some very core differences. The game is a mobile game and thereby is a bit more simplistic due to graphical limitations, possibly with less maps, secret areas, mechanics, etc. You now have a squad of 3 survivors you can swap between mid-run. There are some new exclusive survivors, which I will get to in a minute. The game has an isometric layout as opposed to true 3D, and the biggest change that I want to talk about right now is that this is a gacha game. For those who don't know, gacha games are essentially games with gambling. In a gacha game, many of the characters or weapons or abilities in-game are not obtained through gameplay, but rather locked behind what are essentially loot boxes. You have to spend money or in-game currency, often available to be purchased with real money, to pull for or try for a chance to get the character, weapon, etc. that you want, and getting it is entirely luck-based. Often, a set of characters or weapons or etc. will all be grouped together under one banner, with multiple banners existing in the game, and you pull for characters in each banner, having a select chance of getting certain things in that banner based on how many other things are in it and the rarity of each thing in the banner. This is a very popular gaming archetype in the mobile market because it is one of the most financially viable gaming archetypes out there. The games use a player's desire for a certain character or weapon, sometimes driven up by making said item very overpowered to drive players to gamble for it, and often make said item have a ridiculously low chance of actually being gotten via rarity or banner size, increasing how much currency the players need to gamble to get what they want. This, combined with the currency needed to gamble either being very rare in-game but purchasable with real money, or just straight up only being available by real money purchases, makes players spend a lot of cash compared to other versions of in-game purchases, which are often guaranteed transactions. This is obviously a bit of an iffy move by Gearbox. Taking their newly acquired IP and immediately turning it into the cashiest cash cow of mobile game types definitely doesn't bode well for Gearbox's intentions. It would have been very possible to keep the entire game as it was without making it a gacha. Just have the survivors be unlockable through certain achievements in-game like Risk of Rain 1 or 2. It could be argued that this archetype was chosen because they wanted to change up gameplay, but really it's most likely entirely for financial reasons. This will definitely earn more money than them just making the survivors unlockable in-game or even just making them a flat price versus having to gamble for them. And its gacha nature definitely isn't shaking up the gameplay in any meaningful way, it just looks like Risk of Rain 2. Now, I don't have a huge problem with gacha games, I have my opinions, but they are what they are. However, taking a pre-existing non-gacha game and making a gambling-centric mobile port of it that no one asked for that has very similar gameplay to the original just seems like it was almost done entirely for monetary gain. It isn't driving forward the story, it isn't innovating on the Risk of Rain formula, and most of all, not many people at all were asking for it. This game just kinda didn't really need to exist, save for monetary purposes. And yet, they still added some exclusive survivors to it regardless. This got me a little mad. I know the new DLC coming up will have new survivors, and maybe those tie into the mobile one somehow, and I'll talk about that later. But assuming that isn't the case, since we haven't seen the new Risk of Rain 2 survivors, getting new survivors just for a gacha spin-off mobile game that no one asked for is like, you could have done that for the Risk of Rain DLC. Making survivals mobile exclusive or garnered toward the mobile game is just straight up taking away potential content from Risk of Rain 2, which causes problems far beyond a removed gacha spin-off. Again, for sake of fairness, it is kinda early on, so maybe these survivors will get added in the new Risk of Rain 2 DLC coming up, but just the fact that they put resources and ideas into these new survivors to promote a mobile gacha game instead of using these concepts for Risk of Rain 2 is a little irksome, considering all of those resources and ideas could have gone to Risk of Rain 2 or future mainline Risk of Rain content, but may not have because profit margins. Now, to that point, Gearbox did state that a separate team is working on this project in a collaboration with the game studio Frima, meaning its development shouldn't drastically affect development on Risk of Rain 2, which is good. If they were pulling actual necessary resources for a gacha game, this would be a very differently toned video. But still, resources aside, just concepting these new survivors for a gacha game and having them potentially only be in a gacha game is disheartening. These are at least decently cool survivor ideas that Risk of Rain 2 or some future mainline Risk of Rain game could have gotten, but now you have to gamble for them on a mobile game to experience them. All in all, the mobile game looks fine. I'm sure it will be a fine spin-off, but Gearbox has made it clear that they are okay with using the Risk of Rain IP and are even willing to do some development of exclusive new content just for monetary gain. Even though it is encased in a good-looking game, and I'm sure the developing team working on it worked hard with a passion to make it, this isn't about the devs. The important piece is Gearbox's intentions. Who's to say what they will do next if this game takes off, which, regardless of how it plays, it probably will at least do alright because of Risk of Rain fans and the lack of these kind of polished roguelikes on the mobile market. Would it be beneath Gearbox to move these monetization practices into Risk of Rain 2? Is it truly out of the picture that they wouldn't possibly explore microtransactional avenues in mainline Risk of Rain considering their growing popularity? Will more spin-offs come about with even more exclusive content locked behind a paywall? I don't know, these could be ludicrous claims, but what I know for sure is that this mobile game really isn't helping Gearbox's apparent position for the future. However, Risk of Rain is not all at risk. The second large piece of content announced by Gearbox is a brand new DLC for Risk of Rain 2, Seekers of the Storm, and contrary to the mobile game, this DLC has garnered a very collectively positive reaction, and for good reason. The Survivors of the Void DLC released last year was a hallmark creation of Hopoo Games, adding tons of new content and innovating on the Risk of Rain narrative at the same time. And Gearbox trying to replicate that innovation in their own new DLC has got fans way more excited than their mobile endeavors. Seekers of the Storm was announced to have new maps, new survivors, new items, new mechanics, new lore, pretty much everything that Survivors of the Void added to Risk of Rain, Seekers will add as well, and more. And this content isn't just plentiful, it's got some quality. The newly introduced day-night cycle for each environment and brand new story elements are both some genuine innovation by Gearbox, and even the expected new environments looked like they had some care put into them. Additionally, all the DLC was conceptualized, in the same vein as Survivors of the Void, from lore, i.e. the content in the DLC is themed by the new antagonist introduced in the DLC, the False Sun, who in turn was created from pre-existing lore of Risk of Rain. This was a very exciting prospect to hear, adding DLC that actually ties to and drives forward the lore of Risk of Rain. Gearbox could have just thrown in some new Risk of Rain-like survivors and monsters and items and called it a day, but they took that extra effort to at least somewhat study Risk of Rain lore and make a decently interesting new antagonist that ties from and advances the story of Risk of Rain. And on top of that, they made the corresponding new content formatted around the story they created look pretty good. Certainly nothing absolutely mind-blowing, but still done with care and innovation. Although we didn't get much, from what I saw in the gameplay segment of the trailer, the maps looked good, and the new day-night cycle was a pretty cool brand new idea. And as an aside, even if the day-night cycle is just mostly an aesthetics change and may not have much of an effect on gameplay as a new Void mechanic did, it's still some new innovation which I'm glad Gearbox put the effort into. And we still haven't seen any of the new monsters, survivors, items, and how the false sun fits into gameplay, which leaves even more room for innovation and story building. Seekers of the Storm certainly seems like a promising DLC, and in a very stark contrast to the mobile game, it shows some genuine dedication to Risk of Rain that I was worried we may not see from Gearbox. Although this trailer isn't concrete evidence and we have yet to actually see how the DLC plays out, this is a much better foot for Gearbox to stand on than their mobile game in support of them actually having the same level of care and dedication to Risk of Rain as Hopo Games did. On that note, they are even finally tying up community loose ends, announcing that they finally fixed the porting issues they've had on console for well over a year now for good as of November 8th. And announcing that Survivors of the Void is out on console along with bug fixes and permanently putting console updates in line with PC updates, a problem that the community has had to deal with for forever. Now, you could say that since Gearbox caused the porting issue in the first place, fixing it after such a long time is a too little too late situation, but at least they actually got around to doing it, regardless of how much pressure it took, as that takes some level of care and dedication. So all this is to say that right now the future of Risk of Rain seems pretty undeterminable. Gearbox mentioned in their Twitch announcement of new content that they apparently have 5 to 10 years of content lined up for Risk of Rain, so they obviously have a pretty outstretched plan for the IP. What that plan entails seems a little gray at the moment. On the one hand, the new money-hungry mobile game and Gearbox's less-than-ideal history with altering other acquisitions bodes poorly for the state of Risk of Rain. While on the other, the new DLC, console bug fixes, and the Survivors of the Void port shows a more dedicated face of Gearbox, one that seems to actually want to innovate on Risk of Rain and cares about the status of the IP and its community. It's really a bit of a dichotomy, and considering how early on it is right now at the time of this recording, I'm honestly just unsure of what's to come. While Gearbox may never match Hopu's mastery of Risk of Rain, so long as they listen to the community, study what works, and actually care about the Risk of Rain IP, they could certainly use their more abundant resources to bring Risk of Rain into a brand new era of content, developing and innovating on Risk of Rain in ways we've never seen before, or they could not care at all about Risk of Rain aside from its decently sized player base and drown it in microtransactions for seasonal battle passes and the thick rotor scheme. On that note, what do you think, dear viewer? Are you pessimistic for the future of Risk of Rain? Optimistic? Neither? Both? What do you think the future entails for the IP? Please let me know in the comments. And real quick before I go, I want to say I apologize for the little gap in videos. I am in college again, so free time is basically non-existent. Again. However, this year I will actually be dedicated to posting videos instead of taking a break as I did last year. Albeit, I'll probably be posting at a much slower pace than my already very slow pace prior. So far, my plan is to get a video done monthly at the very least, though that will probably vary wildly depending on how my course load fluctuates. So thank you so much for your patience, drop a sub or a like if you enjoyed, have a good day, and I will see you, eventually, in the next one. Bye.